thank you again for being here and for affording all of us, the staff at St. Cecilia. We're never going to stop thanking you for all that you're doing to make this happen. So thank you again. I have one housekeeping item that I've been asked to tell you about, and that is dinner will be at 5:30 to 6:30, and then we're going to start the movie so that all of us who go to bed at 9 o'clock will have some time to get there. So hang around here, don't go too far as the day progresses, and we have a pretty full day coming up still, all right? Is that all good with everyone? Okay, number 2. I have the great pleasure of introducing, although I don't think you need an introduction, Father Ron Coyne. And St. Cecilia was blessed, and the remote St. Cecilia community was blessed to have the pleasure of your leadership last summer when Father John was on his sabbatical. I don't know if you remember this, but Father Ron is part of the Priest Emergency Response Team, the Diocese of Boston. I think he's the only one in it right now. I'm not going to take any more of his time. So, Father Ron, thank you for coming. We're ready for you.
Thank you very much, Betty Ann, from the Bronx. We appreciate it. What a privilege. It's an honor for me, and when I say that, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I've been a priest a long time. I've been in many parishes in the city of Boston and some outside the city. And I love ministry. I've loved all my years as a priest. But St. Cecilia, as you know, just sets the bar at a totally new level in the Archdiocese of Boston, and probably there may be parishes equal to it. I'm sure there are none better. I can't imagine it, because it's just so welcoming and hospitable, and to be identified with this parish. I mean, most people know about it, but I've experienced it. And you have as well. And you are it. You are part of it, which is great. Far-Flung flock is a huge part of this parish. And John has really recognized you and celebrated you and made people aware of your presence, and how important people are who are live streaming the Mass on television is just as important as people who are there on Sundays, as you know, on the weekend. Also, I've been in, as I said, in Boston most of my priesthood. 5 years ago, I decided that I was in Hyde Park. I was the pastor of 3 parishes there, Most Precious Blood, St. Anne's, and St. Pius, and I decided at that time that I'd rather go on emergency response and fill in for guys who get sick or, have a heart attack or get hit by a car or something like that, which happens, by the way. So I've been doing that now for 4 years. And I've been in parishes from 2 months to 10 months, different ones. And I was here 3 months last summer, as you know. So I continue to do that. Right now I'm in between opportunities. I used to call them assignments, now I call them opportunities. A little more positive approach to things. And I'm in between right now, so I live at St. Camillus in Arlington. And it's 2 other guys that live in the rectory with me. They're both great guys. And so now I'm just waiting for another phone call, but meanwhile I help out in different parishes on weekends, sporadically, if you will. So I drive a Dodge Challenger, which is a very nice car, by the way. And I've had Ford Mustangs, I've had Chevy Monte Carlo SS's, I've had Pontiac Trans Ams. So I always say in parishes that I'm at, people might not remember my sermons, but they always remember my cars. And trust me when I tell you that, it's very obvious. Well, I say that because there's another car that I'm not attracted to, but it's called an Element. I don't know if any of you have one. And I see it on the road periodically, and it's kind of like a box car to me. We used to call them beach wagons when I grew up. I don't know if you know that. Station wagons, beach wagons. It's kind of a cross between that and an SUV. But the reason I tell you this is I saw one the other day on 128. I was driving down the road, and I saw an element. And the license plate, which I sometimes look at, said INMY, in my element. I got it right away. Yeah, and I say that because that's how I feel right now. I'm in my element. I'm in my element, surrounded by you, which is really a privilege. And not because we're all like-minded, by the way, but because we're all open-minded. There's a difference. And open-hearted, I think. When I see signs for some organization that says for like-minded people, I say, I don't react that well to it. If it said open-minded people, I would react very well to that. So, anyways, and that's how Catholic Christians should be. Open-minded and open-hearted. So our differences don't divide us from other people, but they bring us into conversation with other people. Because we can learn from them as well as they can learn from us. So that reminds me that gets me to the point of, why we had one of the greatest programs I think the Catholic Church has run in the Archdiocese of Boston during my time was called Why Catholic? We've had other programs like Come Home to the Church, The Light is On for You, and all these different programs over the years. But the most successful one from my point of view has been Why Catholic? And when we had that, I was in Randolph, Massachusetts for 7 years at St. Mary's in Randolph. In fact, I was just at a funeral there this morning, same parish. And we had 15 groups for Why Catholic. Each one of them had 10 to 12 people in it. So over 150 people, parishioners who decided they wanted to take part in Why Catholic, which is a 6-week program during Lent, and then another 6 weeks during Advent, or 4 weeks of Advent, but we made it 6. And they met together, there was a program, they had books and they had music, and they just talked about their faith. Adult Catholics, imagine sitting down, having honest discussions about what they were taught, what they believe, exchanging views with one another, and learning from each other's experience. It was just phenomenal. So I was thinking to myself, the difference between why I am a Catholic and why am I a Catholic. Why I am a Catholic is because I was baptized Catholic. I was brought up Catholic. It's a cultural thing, if you will. That's why people today, if they're Catholic, they might have their kids baptized, or maybe First Communion, maybe Confirmation. Those days are going quickly, but a lot of people will do that because they're cultural Catholics. But they've never really bought into it, if you will. As compared to why am I still a Catholic? Why am I still a Catholic? Because that's a choice I make. That's a spiritual thing. I have to study, I have to read, I have to learn, I have to have conversation with people. So I can talk to people about not only what I believe, but why I believe it. Which is what Why Catholic did for a lot of Catholics for the first time in their life. They get honest discussions with other adult Catholics about what they believe and what they don't believe. And why they believe it or why they don't believe it. And from my point of view, it all comes down to, the bottom line is, what is my concept of God? That makes all the difference in the world to me. There were a lot of things I was taught about God growing up that I no longer believe. There are a lot of things that I do believe today that no one has taught me. I've come to my own conclusions about why that is. So when somebody says to me today, do you believe in God? The first thing I say to them is, what do you mean by God? And then when they tell me, I either say, yes, I do, or no, I don't believe in that understanding of God. So if somebody says, God who's sitting on the sky in the throne, watching every single thing we do, judging people, condemning people to hell, my answer is no. I was brought up to believe in that God, but I surely don't believe in that concept of God today. But then I tell them what I do believe, what my understanding of God truly is. And that today is that God is love, as St. Paul said, and God is life itself. So instead of fearing God, as I was brought up to do, I now experience God. Every time I experience love, every time I experience life. So it's an enjoyable experience in my life. Most of us were brought up with an understanding of God that was based on the Council of Trent in 1545, by the way, and the First Vatican Council in 1870. So when we grew up, myself in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, when we grew up during that time, We just were taught an understanding of God that we didn't realize at the time came from Trent and came from Vatican I. And why did we believe it? Because the church told us. Why would we question that? It was just who God was. This demanding, dictatorial person sitting in the sky, etc. But you get to the point when I found out that the Catholic Church and God are not equal. Once you discover that, it means that we not only are learning from the Catholic Church, but we're also learning from everyone else in our world about who God is for them. And if somebody has grown and evolved and matured, they may open my mind so that I want to say, gee, I think I need to grow, evolve, and mature so I can enjoy this experience rather than fear this God who's been presented to me, you know. So that was a huge experience for me, a huge discovery to realize that the Catholic Church and God were not equal. But as you know, when we grew up, many of us, anyone in authority was unquestioned. Whether they were in authority in our country, as you know, or whether they were authority in the church, whatever they said had to be true. Why? Because somebody in authority told us. How they got that authority, we didn't even know. Didn't make any difference. They had the position, they told us, we believed it. And that was it. Unquestionably. It's amazing to me today to realize that, but we did. For me, that all changed with two things that happened. The Second Vatican Council and the Vietnam War. Those two things had me realize that the only absolute in my life is God. And so, for example, I was brought up to believe the president was the most honest person in the world, and we believed it. Why would he not be? He. And the other one was we believed the Pope was the holiest person in the world. Why would he not be? Because this is what we believed, and that's why we listened to them, unquestionably. So then I went to the seminary, and St. John's Seminary in Brighton. And Vatican II was going on at the time. We were just talking about Vatican II over here. Vatican II was going on at the time. I went in 1965, by the way. That's when I entered. And I would have to say, even as a seminarian then, we didn't pay a lot of attention to the Vatican Council because we just figured, there were still remnants in my mind, whatever they decide is fine. They're in charge of the church, and whatever way it goes, and we weren't that invested in it, I don't believe. But then I went to New Orleans for 2 summers. I spent down there in a program called the Witness Program. And it was during that time, it was 1969 and 71. Those are the 2 summers I was down there. And it was seminarians, priests, nuns, and Catholic people from all over the world, all over the country rather, who volunteered to get out to New Orleans after Hurricane Betsy, just as they had Hurricane Katrina. Same situation, just devastated the city. So Archbishop Hannon, who was down there, invited all of us to go. So I decided to get out there. And that experience changed my life. But one of the things that happened was, think about it, that's 69, and we were down, we stayed at the seminary, Notre Dame Seminary in New Orleans. We stayed there every night and then went to the parish every day and then all these activities. But they had a pub in the seminary, a pub. First time I ever heard of that. So we get out. So then, of course, we come back at night after working all day long and everybody gets down to the pub. The nuns, the priests, the seminarians, everybody, and have a great time. But the good thing about it was, because the Vatican Council had created this atmosphere where there was all sorts of possibilities and all sorts of hopes and dreams, and you exchange those with the nuns and the priests. Some of those priests and nuns ended up getting married, by the way, because they met down there, and happy with them, happy for them. But it was just such a hope-filled time for everyone. And that was the Vatican Council. That was the beginning of my saying, wow, it doesn't have to be the way I was taught it had to be. It doesn't have to be that way. There's other ways of looking at things. And so I began to do that. And then I started thinking, then we went back, and after I was ordained, we had study weeks that the Archdiocese ran for priests. And the seminary faculty and people from all over the country come in to speak to us about the Vatican Council and the possibilities and new things, the way of looking at things and how things are evolving. And I was so excited about it. I really got caught up in it all. I was a young priest at the time, some of the older priests were hesitant to buy into this. They had a very difficult time understanding it, and I understand that as well. But one of the things I realized from that, trust me when I tell you this, that the difference between traditions, theology, and faith. Those are huge, and I didn't realize this until the Vatican Council and those who were teaching us taught me this. See, we believe that everything the Catholic Church taught us was equally to believe. whether it was a tradition, theology, or faith. But then I realized, wait a minute, traditions can change. For example, we can't eat meat on Fridays, or you have to fast before you go to communion. Those are traditions. We believe they were unchangeable. We probably thought they started with Jesus and went up to our present time. That's how sacred they were to us. And we never thought they could ever change. And then you move to another level where you talk about theology, which is above traditions, obviously. For example, the sacraments. All we were taught about the sacraments growing up, I just figured it was you always had to receive communion in the tongue. Why? Because that's the way it always was, we thought. You always had a communion. You always had to go to confession in the confessional. Why? Because we thought they always did it that way. Sacrament of the sick, which was extra mention, only for people who are dying. So we believed all of that. And all of a sudden the Vatican Council said there are other ways to look at things. And just using the Eucharist as an example, how things change. Even though it's theology, it can change, and it will change, and it needs to change to adjust with the times. So we're brought up thinking everybody has to receive communion in their tongue. Why? Because we're not worthy to receive communion, right? We're not worthy to take communion in our hand. Only the priest is worthy. We're unworthy. The altar rail reminded us of that, by the way. But if you did your homework, which you've probably done, some of you, the reason that happened was the church is 2,000 years old. After 1,000 years of receiving communion in their hands, by the way, and there are books that tell people how to receive communion from the year 200 and 300. So after receiving communion in their hand for 1,000 years, all of a sudden they realized some people are taking the Eucharist home with them. And they're building shrines in their houses, and they're worshiping it. So the Catholic Church said, we're going to stop that abuse. And the way we're going to stop it is, you are no longer able to receive communion on your tongue because you've abused, in your hand because you've abused that right. Now you'll have to take communion on your tongue. That way they stopped the abuse. But it also told us we're not worthy. And then they built the altar rail to separate us from the priests. They had us kneel down because we weren't worthy. It was a sign of subjugation and all that type of thing. So we grew up believing that we were terrible people. And unless we went to confession, we couldn't go to communion. All that, it all blossomed. What's the word I want to say? It all just
Mushroomed.
Yes, exactly. Mushroomed. And so now we realize that theology can change, and thank God it has. Thank God it has. But the third level, there's traditions that can change, and they will. There's theology that can change, and sometimes it has to. And then there's faith. Faith. They're not all equal. Faith is what I center my life around. Faith is what I preach about. Faith is what makes me who I am today. Faith tells me how I believe I am in God's eyes. So, for example, I went on sabbatical in Menlo Park, California, 25 years ago, 1998, I believe it was. That's 25 years. And Menlo Park, California, people in California, beautiful state, as I told them. And Menlo Park is right near San Francisco and San Jose, in that area up there. And it was Vatican II Institute, just the name of it, made me want to go there. It was great. 35 guys from all over the country were there. Never met any of them before. And we spent 3 months together, traveling, and studying, and retreat. And played a pool in the backyard. So it was just a great time. But one of the professors we had, I mentioned this at Mass once, one of the professors we had said to us, when you're talking about God, you have to draw your lifeline responsibly. In other words, the things in your life that you believe about God that are non-negotiable. That's when I started to realize, wow, what I learned about traditions and theology and faith makes sense now. Because all of those things I learned, I don't believe them all equally. How could I? So what do I really believe? What do I really believe? What are the things in my life that nobody's going to take away from me? What are the things in my life that truly make me who I am? So I come to 3 conclusions, by the way. 3 things that are my lifeline. Nobody will take these away from me. I preach about it. It's my passion, if you will. Number 1, that God loves me unconditionally. I wasn't brought up to believe that, by the way. I was brought up to believe if I am good, God will love me. So I spent my whole life trying to be good, not succeeding, feeling guilty about everything I did, going to confession every week because I thought I made God stop loving me. Imagine. I thought I had the power to make God stop loving me. Well, guess what? I don't believe that anymore. I believe the opposite of that. Not if I am good, God will love me, but that God loves me, and that makes me good. It's changed my whole life. Changed my whole attitude toward myself, toward God, toward the world. I don't have to earn God's love. I can't lose God's love. It's a gift in my life. That's non-negotiable for me. Nobody's taken that away from me. Trust me, I will go to my grave believing that and sharing that message with other people who need to hear it, by the way. Number two, Jesus is the Son of God. I was taught that. I believe it today. However, that doesn't separate me from anyone else. It makes me respect people as much as I would like to be respected by them for believing what I believe. So I respect Jewish people, I respect Muslims, I respect humanists and atheists and Buddhists and Hindu. I'm happy for them. But I just believe that no one personifies God in the world today like Christ does. And that's what I believe, that's what I share. Nobody's taken that away from me. And number three, I believe there is life after this life. I was brought up to believe it. I still believe it. I don't know what is beyond the grave, but I do know who. And that's the way that we can talk about it, we can read about it, we can theologize about it, but I just know that when I die, I will be living in the presence of God. What that means beyond that, I don't know. And I really believe, by the way, that when we come face to face with God, whatever that means, that none of us will be able to resist the gift of God's love at that moment. So people say to me, well, what about hell? I said, well, if God is living in the presence of, if heaven is living in the presence of God after I die, which I do believe it is, then hell would be not living in the presence of God after I die. So then the question becomes, can we ever be out of God's presence? That's a good question, by the way. I asked myself that, and I've come to my own conclusion, as I usually do. Now, you know what we call going to Mass on weekends, we call that the Sunday experience now, which is so great. And in this parish, it is a Sunday experience. Some parishes, it wouldn't be. But in this parish, it truly is a Sunday experience. Anybody that comes into this church, they have to say, wow. Wow is a word like hallelujah, isn't it? You can't put anything on it. It's just, you just know what it means. And when you walk into this church, you either say, wow, or hallelujah. It's truly a Sunday experience. We had a convocation for all the priests in the diocese about 2 months ago. It was at some hotel in Framingham. And they had a speaker there called, his name is Father Paul Turner. He's a liturgist. You may know him. I think he's from Kansas City, Missouri, maybe somewhere around there. He's the rector of their cathedral. And he was speaking about the presiding at Mass. That was his topic, how to preside at Mass. So right away I'm kind of leery about going to it, but I went. And he's written a book called Ars Celebrandi, which is the art of celebrating or the art of celebration. And he spoke in the morning about how to say Mass, literally how to say Mass. And I was really not impressed personally. I had a hard time listening to him because, he's talking about things like the only time you should make contact with the community is when you're addressing them, like the Lord be with you. But otherwise, you're supposed to be looking at the book, so you get the words correctly, or looking at whatever you think is out there, if you will. And so I was just not reacting well to that. And then after he spoke, I thought to myself, he gave us each a book, by the way. He gave every one of us a book. And I read the book. I went home and I read the book, and I'm probably the first priest to read it all the way through. Because I wanted to know what he had to say. And I came to this conclusion, and I really believe this, that the difference between saying Mass and celebrating the Eucharist is huge. If you're going to say Mass, then before you walk into the sanctuary, he didn't write this, but this is my conclusion, that you have to check at the door your personality, your humanity, your theology, your ecclesiology, and then you go in and say Mass. As compared to bringing all of those gifts with you and celebrating the Eucharist with all the people in the community who also have those gifts as well. And you truly celebrate the Eucharist here. There's no doubt about it. And as I said when I was here, it's not about the messenger, it's about the message. The message here is just so welcoming and hospitable and open-minded and open-hearted. and as is John the messenger. So you have both of those gifts here, and how blessed you are. And so you go into another parish anywhere, your own home parish or another one if you're traveling, and you know right away. I'm taking my sister up to Maine the 19th to 22nd, and I said, Elaine, I'll go to Mass with you up there. She goes, if she goes up there on the weekends, to this parish. I've never been to it. But I'm looking forward to it, but I'm hoping that it's going to be a good experience. Yeah. I'm hoping it will be, and time will tell. My sister's one of those, she's very invested, but she goes to Mass, and she does that because she's Catholic, and I appreciate that. But it should be interesting. When I was in Hyde Park, this last parish I was in for the 5 years, there's a rabbi called Rabbi Keith Stern, and he called me up one day and he said, Ron, he says, I'd love to have a program with you, and we call it The Priest and the Rabbi Walk into a Bar. So we did. We had 4 sessions at this bar in Dedham. It's called Deli After Dark, I think it was called. And they opened up on Monday nights, because it was closed on Monday nights, so they opened for us. 75 people, we sold out every time. They didn't pay anything, they just came in. And they could have a drink if they wanted to have something to eat and all that stuff. And then we just had the 2 of us sat on stools, like those stools, and just had a conversation about life and about church and about beliefs and about faith. It was unbelievable. It was just so life-giving, because it wasn't one of us had the right answers. It wasn't about that. It was about learning from each other's experience. It was phenomenal. And some of you have probably heard of Theology on Tap, which is, some parishes have it, where they go into a bar again and they have a few drinks and then they have a session. I just did one in January in Plymouth, Mass, and about 75 or 100 people were there, and they have a separate room afterwards, and you sit down and you just talk, have a great discussion. Those are positive things. But you don't go there to be told what to believe. You go there to discover who you are and how your faith affects your life and how other people's faith affects their lives, and you share all that, and it's life-giving. It's life-giving. I wrote, a while ago, I wrote the 10 lessons I learned from Vatican II, 10 of the lessons. There are many lessons, of course. And I just want to share those with you, 10 insights, I guess I call them, from Vatican II that I now have that have changed my life. Number 1, Mass, the Eucharist, is now seen as a community celebration, not a private devotion. And you're as important to the celebration as I am. What a great discovery. Vatican II told us that. Number 2, God loves me unconditionally. I cannot earn that love or lose that love. I mentioned that. Number 3, no religion is favored by God over other religions. The Catholic Church and God are not equal. As an example, the Council forced us to face our anti-Semitism. The Vatican Council told us. Number 4, the Bible is meant to be taken seriously, but not always literally. We are encouraged to study the history and background of Scripture. We were never encouraged to do that. We let the church do that for us, or the authorities. Now we do. Number 5, it's our baptism that gives us rights and responsibilities and privileges in the church, not being ordained a priest. 6, it's no longer the church and the world. We're not enemies of one another. It's the church in the world. The church is a human institution and must adopt and adapt to the times. 7, the sacraments were not always celebrated the way they are today. They evolve as we better understand their purpose. 8, every Catholic person must form his or her own conscience through prayer, listening to the church, and learning from their own life experience. We then may disagree with the institutional church and still be good Catholics. My father was in World War II, in the Army in the Pacific. He got the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. He came home. One day we were watching television, and the president was on. I forget what years, this years ago. And he disagreed. My father verbally disagreed with the president. And I thought to myself, wow, this is kind of interesting. He was willing to give his life for the country, but this did not make him a bad American or unpatriotic because he criticized the country. It made him a better American. He wanted the country to be all he believed it could be. I believe that's true with the church. Criticizing the church or leadership in the church doesn't make us bad Catholics or un-Christian or means that we're against it. The Catholic Church, number 9, the Catholic Church must challenge each of us to take responsibility for those who are marginalized, ostracized, and have the least opportunities among us. The poor are a priority. And number 10, the history of the church is meant to be studied, and we have to face our history honestly. We have not always been a positive presence in the world and may need to apologize and make reparations. Because I embrace these beliefs that I just expressed to you, I'm a better human being, a better Christian, and a better priest, I believe, by the way. Now, just a couple of things I want to say. One of my favorite passages in Scripture is Jesus going up to the disciples and saying, "Who do people say I am? I've been with you for 3 years. I'm interested in what people think about me." So they say, as you know, somebody said, "You're John the Baptist, Jeremiah, Elijah, one of the prophets." And then he said to Peter, "But who do you say I am?" And Peter said, "You're Christ, the Son of God." Why do I like that? Because the authorities, again, told everyone what to believe. Peter, 2,000 years ago, disagreed with them. He disagreed with what they told him. He said, "No, I've come to my own conclusion. This is who God is for me. Jesus is the Son of God. I believe that." And I believe every one of us, we respect authority. I respect authority as much as the next person. But they can learn from me as well. The Synod, speaking of learning from each other, one of the things I love about Pope Francis, one of the things I love most about him, is that he will sit down at the table with a female, a gay male, a transgender person, a Muslim, a Hindu, people married 3 times, whatever it is, and he'll have a conversation with them. And he knows that he's not the only teacher at the table. That's huge. That he's going to learn as much from them as they will learn from him. We're all teachers. We're all learners. It's when you discover that, it just opens up a whole new world. That's why he's such a threat, if you will, to so many of those who believe that they are the only teachers and that everybody has to listen to them. And that's why this synod is going to be very, very interesting, by the way. I had Mass at Regis College. By the way, Regis College, which is in Framingham, Massachusetts, Catholic college. Sunday night they have Mass. And the last 3 weeks I've celebrated there because the chaplain there was sick. He's a friend of mine, so he's been sick, so I went there for him. And I asked them last week to tell me what they thought. First of all, I didn't know if they knew what the Synod was, so I explained what was going on. The first time women have an equal vote, by the way, it was just huge. I'm sure some people aren't happy about that. But I said, tell me what's wrong with the Catholic Church and what's right with the Catholic Church, because it'd be very interesting. So we had that discussion. But meanwhile, I found in my room, this is a letter in 2015 or 16, they were having the Synod on the family. Remember that? Yeah. And we were all asked at meetings and all this type of thing, and write our thoughts down and send them to the Pope, if you will. So I did. I wrote my letter. I found it. So this is my letter I wrote to the Pope in those days. And it's still very, very, to me, it makes sense to bring the same issues up at this council, at this Synod. Dear Pope Francis, I hope life is treating you well. I am a priest in the Archdiocese of Boston, and I thank you for giving me permission to be human and for reminding us that it is the gospel against which we measure our lives. I am responding to your inquiry regarding the Synod on the family. These are my feelings and beliefs in no particular order. Our belief in the sacrament of marriage is based on what God has joined together, we must not separate. We are under the impression that if a couple is married in the church, that therefore they have been joined by God. We now know that God is beyond organized religion and that no one has captured God. With that in mind, there may be many couples married civilly whom God has joined together, while there could be couples married in the eyes of the church whom God has not joined. The present view limits God and alienates many Catholics from the church and from the Eucharist. 2. According to the Second Vatican Council, there are 2 purposes to marriage: to foster the love between the couple and the procreation of children. Sometimes the fear of conceiving children can negatively affect the love that a couple need to express intimately and sexually. Our view of birth control must be relaxed. 3. This is to the Pope, so I don't have any guilt saying it to anyone else. I couldn't agree with you more. The Eucharist is food for the journey, not a reward for being good. Coming to the Eucharistic table can be as healing as celebrating the sacrament of reconciliation. The good done by going to communion far outweighs any good done by not going to communion. 4. Thank you. Our world today sees all creation as a gift of God. In fact, creation reveals God's presence to humanity. There are many ways of protecting our environment for future generations. The present birth rate can be a serious threat to our planet. 5. No one enters into a marriage apart from their culture, history, background, and life experience. Even though a person appears to be mature when they pronounce their marriage vows, we now know many are products or victims of alcoholism, addiction, abuse, and domestic violence, which surely affects their ability to freely make that commitment. Next, we need to return to the understanding of vocation to the priesthood as a call from the community based on the gifts, skills, and spiritual health of a member of a certain community. They are chosen because they are gifted. Today, we rely on an individual deciding to study for the priesthood and then assume that they and they alone possess the necessary giftedness. For example, because someone is ordained, we believe he has the gift of preaching, or because he becomes a priest, we place him in the sacrament of reconciliation as counselor and or spiritual director. Next, if the institutional church and the gospel are at odds, it is the life of Christ that must be the measure against which we make our decisions. Sometimes it may even be the difference between words attributed to Christ and his life story that forces us to choose. The guiding principle is that Christ healed those no one would heal, touched those no one would touch, forgave those no one would forgive, and loved those no one would love. That is the gospel message unabridged. And finally, we have progressed greatly in our understanding of sexuality over the years. We now realize that sexual orientation is not a choice, but determined by genetics. It is therefore inhuman and unchristian to demand lifelong sexual abstinence from those who are homosexual or lesbian or transgender, while encouraging those who are heterosexual to pursue an intimate sexual relationship in marriage. I applaud you and those surrounding you for your determination to let the Catholic people in the world know that it is their baptism that makes them citizens of the Church. May God continue to challenge us to be all we are meant to be as individuals and a church. Enjoy life. Sincerely, Ron Coyne. I'm sure. And finally, just, we talk about faith, hope, and love. Faith is a gift. Love is a response, but hope is a choice. And I choose to be hopeful. So, with all of that said, thank you.